I would just like to share a few housekeeping tips and reminders. Today's webinar will be recorded. You'll be able to access the webinar on the Services website or Syracuse University's YouTube page. During the presentation, please limit the number of browsers you have open. This will help the presentation run smoothly for all. If you do happen to experience technical difficulties, there's a help function provided by Adobe Connect, and you can also call the Adobe Connect support team. We appreciate your feedback about the webinar series, and a survey will be distributed following the presentation. You can also contact me directly with any comments or feedback, or if you're interested in hosting a webinar in the future. I will put my contact information in the chat box over on the right. Questions are, we are asking to have questions held until the end. Ilyas wants to make sure he has the time to cover everything, and you might answer a potential question. So we'll make sure we leave a few minutes at the end for you to type your questions into the chat area for him to answer. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our presenter, Ilyas Akbar. He's a certified financial planner and a partner at Vital Planning Group. He started his career with KPMG and in 2004 transitioned to financial services with AXA Advisors before coming to the Barnum Financial Group in 2014. At VPG, Ilyas assists clients with comprehensive financial planning, including retirement, estate planning, asset management, college planning, and risk management. His goal is to empower his clients with the information they require to make sound financial decisions for the long term. He holds a bachelor's degree in accounting from Syracuse University from the year 2000, and he has gone on to earn a certificate in retirement planning at the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School. He holds the Series 7 and 66 registrations and various insurance licenses, and is a repeat qualifier for the $1 Million Round Table, one of the financial services industry's top distinctions. On today's webinar, he'll provide a workshop on how to successfully integrate lifelong money management techniques into our everyday routine, and he'll focus on building strong financial foundations with some basic concepts for all stages of financial planning. You'll hear practical tips on setting goals for budgeting, saving, and investing that will help you strategically pay off debt, save for retirement, build wealth, and protect your family. And with that, Ilyas, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. It's a pleasure and honor to be here speaking to Syracuse alumni about this important topic. And we're going to kind of jump right into it. And I put my contact information here, and I really put that there because you'll see at the end, I did say, you guys can reach out to me for additional questions, consultations, etc., because I know it's tough to get through a lot of topics in the short amount of time, and I'm sure everyone will have questions that pertain to their particular situation. So just jumping right into the material, the agenda, we're going to cover two topics. One is mainly like financial 101, budgeting, saving, debt, priorities, and then we're going to shift gears into retirement. So those are the two areas that we're going to focus on today. And the first thing we'll talk about is identifying priorities. And really what that is goal setting. The first step in assessing your finances and setting goals, et cetera, is really saying, okay, what's important to me? And for everyone, that's going to be a little bit different. One way I like to really break that down that I think makes it simple is think about your goals in three buckets. One is your short-term bucket. The second one is your mid-term bucket, and the last one is your long-term bucket. So if you can picture that, I know it doesn't have that on the slide. Your short-term is really things you may need in the immediate future in the next 1 to 2 years. For most people, that might be like a large purchase, like buying a home, buying a car, maybe making additional renovations on their house, and it also could be your emergency fund. So in the short term, things may happen that are unforeseen, like the loss of a job or financial hardship. So that's your short-term bucket. Your midterm bucket is things that may come down the road. It's not as long-term as retirement per se, but maybe sending a child to college or buying a home, 5 to 7 years out, or a second home, or some other large vacation. You want to travel the world for a year. That could be like a midterm goal. And then long-term goal, I like to say for everyone should really be retirement because it's such a big goal and dollar amount that people need to save for. So when you think about priorities, you might want to divide your priorities into short term, midterm, and long term. And that can be a good way to start in a very simple way. Once you identify your priorities, then you want to also figure out, okay, what's the pecking order? Do we want to take this, buy this home first? Do we want to do other things? And this is where you want to involve your family and other people that, are going to participate in the decision making process. So that's actually important because sometimes what happens, especially when you have, let's say, husband and wife or extended family that's involved financially, one person sometimes is the person that might take charge of the finances, and we see that a lot with couples where one person really handles the finances, the other person just really doesn't get involved with any of the details. And that's okay because you have to divide and conquer in relationships in terms of your priorities, but you want to make sure everyone's on the same page with what the goals are. So that's very important to lay the right groundwork. And this gives you an idea of some of the different things that might come into, laying out your budget. So now that you've identified your goals, now you not just need to figure out, okay, how are we going to meet these goals? How are we going to save? How are we going to pay off debt? How are we going to buy a home, etc. So you want to start building a budget, right? And we've all heard that term, and we probably all hate the word budget, right? It's not something fun to do, and to be honest, no one wants to do it. But it's a necessary part of establishing your financial foundation. So this just lays out what might go into a budget. And there's actually a budgeting tool. If you send me an email, I can send you an Excel worksheet that we give all of our clients, which already has formulas built into it. So you can just drop all your numbers in and adjust them easily. So I'd be happy to share that with anyone who wants it. But these are the different areas that would go into a budget. Um, it's a lot of it is self-explanatory. So you can see on the left side, you have current expenses, which is just basically your day to day. And then on the right, you have things that might be more long-term goals that you have in line with, things you want to do, like buying a home, etc. This is a very critical step. And one thing that I'll say is, I think when most people think of a budget, they think of every month I have to write everything I spend and track every dollar. You don't have to do that. What you should do is go through an exercise where you do this once, and you should understand what your necessary cash flow is on a monthly basis. And from that number, you can start to decipher how much you should technically be able to save or not save, and what surplus exists. So again, like most of the expenses we have, I would say 80 to 90% of them are generally static, reoccurring expenses like your rent, your mortgage, your cell phone bill. All of these things generally are the same number every month. And then from there, you just have to figure out roughly what your variable expenses or your discretionary spending is. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go further along in this budgeting um, slideshow. So you want to basically create a simple or complex budget, depending on how detail oriented you are or you aren't. I always tell people do what works for you. So don't look for perfection with this because we've seen that where, people who are working with, they're like, I'm going to have my budget. I'm working on it. It's like 6 months in and they're still working on their budget. And they're trying to get perfection, which is never going to happen because it's a moving target. Um, so here are some of the components, right? You want to know what your net household income is. You want to figure out what your fixed expenses are, and that's what I was talking about before, your mortgage, your rent, and all the other things that are just reoccurring. And then from there, you want to move to discretionary, and that's usually where people get hung up because they're like, oh, how much do I spend eating out? How much do I spend shopping, etc. If you really want to dive in, you can take like an average. You can look at, let's say you use a debit card or a credit card. You can look at the last 3 months and say, how much did I spend eating out? And just take an average and go from there. Um, and just move along. That the key thing is to keep the process moving. And then from there, you can start to estimate savings goals. So For example, and we're going to look at a sample budget right here. So this just shows obviously a breakdown in a pie chart format. But what you can see here is this individual, hypothetical individual, has basically made a budget and attached all the numbers. Um, and this is basically inclusive of savings. So if you look at, there's a number that's in a pink or salmon color, $400. That's how much they've allocated to savings, right? So that's the key thing is what they've done in this budget is they said, okay, you know what, here's all our expenses and let's put an actual savings item into our budget, which is ultimately what you're trying to do in this process. You're trying to say, okay, I have other long-term goals, right? I have to pay the bills and I have to live, which, is today and tomorrow, but I need to figure out how or what resources I have to put toward these other goals that are maybe further out in life. And how do I figure out how much I have to spend on those long-term goals? So just moving along into savings. Now we talked about setting goals, understanding what your goals are, creating a budget, right? These are the first two steps in terms of like looking at your finances. At some point, you obviously want to move towards savings, which is usually the goal of going through this process, is to start saving or increase your savings, etc. So the importance of savings, and I'm not going to belabor this point. We all get hit over the head constantly about why we should save, right? Um, the key thing with savings is obviously preparing for the unexpected, and really helping you with those short and long term goals. Because without a savings plan, you will not get to those goals. And we've all probably seen or have people, or maybe some of us, are basically living check to check, where we just can't get into that position where we feel like we can save. So you just have to make it a priority, and at the end of the day, it's a math calculation because that's really what the budget is. This is the numbers I have to spend, and this is what I'm spending it on, and where can I find some savings? This slide just shows like how even starting small can get you big results. So this is a weekly savings rate. Someone who's saving $200, I'm sorry, $20 a week versus 50 versus 100 to 150 a week, and over a year how much they've accumulated. So, you can see saving $20 a week is going to get you somewhere, and then you can increase that over time, and the numbers start to multiply. So, the key thing is starting small, starting wherever you're comfortable. A lot of times, I'll tell people just start with the number that you could do now. You know, even before you do the budget. Let's say there's a number in your head, every month I can save this number, or I can send extra towards my debt that I'm trying to pay off. Just start with that number. And then you can go through all this process and maybe change the number, increase the number, hopefully. But starting today is very important. And that's sometimes what I think delays us. We're waiting for an event. Oh, once I do my budget, then I'll do this, or once this happens, and then, once that time comes, something else comes up. And before you know it, a year has gone by and you haven't started your savings account. Um, this goes into the power of compounding. So this just shows you, if you were saving money and you were earning a 2% interest, what your money would grow to. So basically, you can see with interest over time, your savings can multiply, um, and compound and grow, because that's what essentially what you want. And we know in today's world, getting 2% is probably in the bank is not realistic. But the concept is the same. So, whatever interest rate you get or whatever rate of return you get, that's going to compound and grow over time. So that works in your favor. Um, and this really applies even with investing over time. We will talk a little bit about that in retirement. So you definitely want to take advantage of that. And this is just giving you dollar amounts over time. So if you're saving based on the numbers we were looking at earlier, you can see over, years you've built up basically almost $30,000 in savings. So making savings possible, like how do you do it, right? Obviously, payroll deductions is always helpful. Most of us that have 401k or employer-sponsored plans are going to have that option as for retirement, saving in your 401k, which comes right out of your paycheck. I know some employers also allow you to set up, direct from your paycheck contribution to a savings account, et cetera. You can do that if that's what works for you. Um, Automating your savings is very important. And that's the biggest thing I think everyone can do is, and if you think about it, if you set your goals, you did your budget, you looked at your budget and you said, hey, you know what? I should be able to save $200 a month or whatever it is, $200 a paycheck. Um, you can start immediately by just having that money go into a savings account, right from your checking into a savings account every time you get paid, right? So you don't have to set it up through your employer. You can set up your own transfers within different accounts using your banking system. But automation is very important because anyone who's listening who has a 401k or retirement plan knows that, they set it up. I was putting in whatever, 2%, 5%, 10%, whatever that percentage is. And over time, you almost don't notice it. And that balance starts to grow because it's just happening. So you want to do that with your savings. That's very important and not making it a manual thing you have to do every pay period or every month. So automation is very important and very key. And for those people that are just getting started and maybe haven't started savings or saving in general, the habits you form now are very important. So if you're not in the habit of saving, it's going to be tougher and tougher as you progress through life to go back and change that. So we all know we're all human and we're all creatures of habit to some degree. So establishing good habits is very important, and starting small or slow is okay. It's better than not starting at all. Um, Switching gears a little bit into debt and understanding good debt versus bad debt. Um, and a lot of people say, well, what's good debt and what's bad debt? It's just going backwards here. So, we're not going to spend a lot of time on debt, but what's good debt? Good debt is debt that maybe you use to get ahead, like buy a home, to go to college, to pay for maybe your children's college. That's good debt because ultimately, you're investing in yourself, your family. Your home is a place you live. Obviously, we know those things are, most of us aspire to do those types of things. Um, Mortgage debt is tax deductible. The interest rates are super low right now. So, even looking at the market right now, it's actually, if you're in the market for a home, I think you might want to buy a home. It is a good time to buy a home because of interest rates. So that can be considered good debt. Again, a mortgage is tax deductible. It's paying for the place where you live. You're always going to need a place to live. Everyone needs a place to live. Bad debt is basically consumer spending. So spending money on things that you don't really need and maybe spending beyond your means. So, we all know that people use credit cards and have these big balances, and ultimately what they're doing is they're buying things that they really can't afford and then paying for it, over time. And ultimately what you're doing is you're paying so much more for those items because you're getting charged, 10, 20, some cases close to 30% interest on those credit cards. So that's really what you want to avoid, um, is, over the top consumer spending. And if you can do that, then you can manage your debt pretty well. Accessing your credit report, very important. Do it at least once a year. You're entitled to a free credit report once a year from every credit reporting agency. I know there's websites like Credit Karma, et cetera, that offer different credit services to you, but without even using a third party, you can go directly to each credit reporting agency and get your credit report, review it, make sure there's nothing inaccurate on it, nothing on there that is incorrect. Because you want to get that cleared up. You don't want to find out when you go to apply for a mortgage that you have something on your credit that you didn't know was there. And at that point, it's very difficult to get things cleared up quickly when you're already in motion trying to use your credit. moving on from debt, protecting your family. So now this is also very important because a lot of things we're talking about is building your financial foundation, identifying your goals, setting a budget, starting to save, and clearing up debt or looking at your debt and assessing it. And you could be doing all of these things and doing it very well, and there's certain things that may happen, right? So you want to make sure that you protect yourself. And really, what we're talking about here is like, what if I can't work? What if I get sick, injured? If I have a family and kids that rely on me, what if something happens to me and I die? What's going to happen? Even though I'm accumulating towards these goals, suddenly my income is gone and everything could get kind of wiped out or my family could be in jeopardy. So you want to think about those things. They're not pleasant things to think about, but it's important. And we've all seen people in our friends, family, etc., where things have happened. People got sick, people passed away prematurely. And then we've seen, I mean, today you see GoFundMe sites for people where someone passes and the friends and family are trying to raise money for the kids because they were the breadwinner. So those are the kind of things you want to think about. And the two things we tell people to look at is your long-term disability insurance. So again, if you're a young person, you probably glossed over this completely because we've all done that. Um, when you work somewhere, they basically give you long-term disability coverage. Sometimes it's included, sometimes it's optional, sometimes you have different elections to make. Um, so you want to look at that. We've seen a lot of people where they just opt out of it completely, and it's maybe costing pennies out of their paycheck to have it. And what long-term disability does is basically, if you couldn't work, it replaces some of your income, which is key. Or even if you're a single person, because if you can't work, well, how are you going to pay your bills? How are you going to do all the things you want to do? So um, you want to look at what you have through work and then see if it's enough. And there's supplemental coverage you can obtain on top of what you have through work. So there's a lot more that can go into the details of figuring out what kind of disability coverage you should have or what you currently have. But you want to start looking into that and then assessing, is this sufficient? Is it not? Do I need to supplement it? Or do I need to, benefit enrollment period is coming for many of us next month. So now's the time to look at all of those things and see what you have. Life insurance, again, same concept. If something happens to you, you're basically not here anymore. Who's going to provide for your family, for your children? Will they be able to meet their goals and obligations? Simplest example is, let's say I'm saving for my child's college and I'm putting $100 a month in a college plan. I could plan to do that over the next 18 years, but tomorrow, if I'm no longer here and I just started the plan, well, now my child has $100 in their college account and I'm gone. So that might be all they ever have in their college account. So you need something else to come in, like the life insurance, to provide what you were planning to provide for your family. So that's really the concept there. The other thing you want to do is, especially if you have dependents and children, is look into having a will or other legal document. Guardianship is important as well. So sometimes people say, "Well, I don't need a will. You know, I'm not wealthy. I don't have many assets." Um, that's really not true because two things to think about is without a will, um, your estate goes into what's called a probate process, which basically means that your estate goes through the courts. So in order for anyone in your family to legally have rights to your assets, your personal belongings, they have to go through that court process, which no one really wants to go through. A will can help speed that up. The other thing is for people that have children, who's going to be the guardian of your children? So that's a very important designation. It may not be the person that maybe a court would first off think should be the guardian of your children. Because you may say, well, you know what, this person that, would look like the next in line to be guardian of my child is really not the right person to take care of my child. So you can do that in a will and a legal document. If you don't have that, then again, it's left up to a court process to decide. So protection is very important, and this area gets overlooked. Again, it's not something we like to think about a lot, but it is important. So that kind of concludes the first part of our presentation, which was just basic finance 101. What you want to think about is I hope everyone here is getting good information, and you're thinking of things that are actionable for you. And again, I know this doesn't give you everything you need, but at least maybe sparks a couple of things that you want to start pursuing. So the key thing is just taking action and taking steps, right? So if you heard things that you want to put in action, put it into action. And obviously, I can be helpful if you do need to talk offline or have other questions. Um, and here's again contact information in case anyone wants it. And we're gonna now move into the second part of the presentation, which is retirement, and then we'll get into questions and go from there. So we'll just wait a second while it comes up. Hopefully everyone's still awake. Exciting stuff we're talking about.
I know. There you go. All set.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about retirement. Um, this is an aggressive agenda, but we're going to get through this fairly quickly and at least give you a high overview of all the topics. But this is what we're going to talk about today, and I'm not going to just read slides. You guys can all do that. So why save for retirement? Um, I'm sure everyone on this call has been beaten over the head with articles or different areas where you've been hit with retirement, retirement, retirement. It's really simple. At some point, you no longer will want to work. And at that point, you're going to need to live off your assets. And they're either going to be enough or not enough for you to live the lifestyle you want. So that's really what retirement is. It's basically a big savings goal that's a moving target that you're going to have to save for over the course of your life. It is important, obviously, because you need to save for this over the course of your life. And without it, you're not going to basically be able to retire. So, some of the things that are happening that are evolving, obviously, people live longer. We all know that there's rising costs. Healthcare is a big one. But inflation, right? For retirees, inflation is a big deal because they might need to live on a certain amount of income and fewer pensions and Social Security. So, this is big because pensions and Social Security typically were kind of like the bedrock for retirees. I mean, I'm sure everyone knows someone who's collecting a pension and their Social Security and maybe living pretty comfortably off of that, right? And then whatever they have in savings is just on, kind of gravy on top of their basic foundation. But most of us probably on this call will not have a pension, and Social Security is really questionable of what it's going to be able to provide, right? So when you take those two things away, what's left? It's really the amount of money we save on our own, independent of our employer or even government program, basically. So it actually magnifies the need to save. Um, a lot of times people say, "How much should I save?" And really the answer is that's actually a calculation that should be done. And there's online tools. If you work with a financial planner, they can actually do very detailed retirement projections for you. But everyone's number is different because we're all different ages. We make different incomes. We live off different lifestyles. We might have different retirement goals. So all of these things matter. But if you want to start somewhere, 10% is actually a decent starting point of where you should get to. So, you can do all the projections, but most of the time those projections are going to tell people they need to save more than 10% of their income. So, if you just wanted to start somewhere, you can get to 10%. You don't have to start at 10, but get yourself to 10, and then maybe you can start to fine tune and do some calculations to see if you should go above that. You won't have a retirement savings goal. I mean, if you're really young in your 20s or even early 30s, um, it's hard to say when am I going to retire. You might just want to start with like 65 as your retirement projection date, just for purposes of getting going and seeing what these calculators tell you, or if you're working with a financial advisor and they're going to ask you, well, when do you want to retire? So you can start somewhere and go from there. Um, This gives you an idea of what people are saving. I mean, this is from Aon Hewitt. They administer a lot of workplace retirement plans. So, if you're curious to know what maybe people in your age group or your income group are doing, this gives you some perspective. But, I would say I'm a bigger proponent of figuring out what you need versus going by what other people are doing, because that might get you down the wrong path. Inflation, we talked a little bit about inflation. Um, in the earlier part of the presentation. And it's kind of daunting. So, I mean, you can see the numbers here. $1,000 today in 20 years is only going to be worth $456 and so on. So, um, and this is just a 4% inflation rate. So, what does this mean? It means that our money needs to grow, and it really means we need to invest our money for retirement in a manner that we can outpace inflation. And we're not going to talk a lot about investing today, per se, because that's a whole nother subject. But, you know, sometimes we'll find people who are very young with retirement accounts and their money's in cash or money market, and they're not even earning 1%. That's not going to really work. So if you're young, you have a 20, maybe 30-year time horizon, and you should probably look to invest in a manner that's more aggressive to get you a long-term rate of return. Um, Saving as much as you can obviously can help you against inflation, but it's really more of how you invest. That those two things go together. So you can be saving a lot, but if you're choosing the wrong investments, you're going to basically not meet inflation. Um, this is an interesting slide. Uh, People say, when should you start saving? The earlier, the better. We've all heard that. This just puts that into numbers. So basically what you're seeing here is worker A on the left starts saving $100 a month and only does that from age 25 to 35. They, over that period, put $12,000 into this account. It earns 8% average rate of return. It's a hypothetical. Um, and what happens is at age 65, they've accumulated $185,000 from that initial $12,000 investment over 10 years. Worker B waited until age 35, so they started 10 years later, and they actually contributed over 30 years until age 65. And you can see, so they've invested three times the money, $36,000 over the course of their life. And when they retire, they actually still have less money than worker A, even though they put it in for much longer, they put in much more money. And that's really just compounding. Earlier compounding builds on itself, so your investments grow and they grow on top of 8%. It's just compounding. So starting early, the lesson here is start early with less if that's what you need to do. It's better than waiting. And sometimes people wait and they say, you know what, I'm going to wait until I can do 10% or 5%. That's actually a mistake. So even if you're doing 2% of your comp into a retirement plan, it's better to start today. What are the different options? Pre-tax, post-tax. Um, Pre-tax is basically your 401k. Your traditional 401k is pre-tax, which means that whatever amount you contribute into that 401k is lowering your taxable income. Simple example, if you make $100,000 and you elect to put 10% into a 401k, that's $10,000. Your taxable income for that year is going to be 90,000 instead of 100. So basically, you save taxes on $10,000, let's say you're in a 30% tax bracket, it saved you $3,000 in tax by deferring 10,000 of your income to a 401k or other retirement plan. You basically lowered your taxable income, saved $3,000. The other way you can look at it is your net cash flow impact was 7,000. So because you saved 3,000 in taxes, it only cost you 7,000 out of your pay to put away $10,000. So I might have lost some people there, but basically think of it as you make 100, you defer 10,000 into your 401k, which saves you if you're in a 30% tax bracket, $3,000 in taxes. So it actually only hits your cash flow for 7,000 because of the tax savings. So pre-tax is actually good. Many employers now have what's called a Roth 401k where you can make after-tax contributions to what's called a Roth, which is a Roth IRA basically was originally what the only option available as a Roth contribution. So those are after-tax contributions. And if you do make those contributions into a Roth 401k or IRA, that comes out tax-free when you retire. So those are after-tax contributions. On the right here, you see information on what's called post-tax, after-tax retirement contributions. This is not referring to a Roth example. This is basically a lot of plans allow you to start putting away money after taxes once you've maxed out your 401k. I would say that less and less people are doing this just because if you're going to put money away after taxes, you probably not want it to be in a retirement account unless you're doing a Roth. So I know I went through a lot very quickly here, but I just wanted to give you at least a glide path on what you should be looking into. Employer-sponsored plans are basically 401k plans for most of us. If you work in not-for-profit, it might be called a 403b. It's really the same thing. If you work for the government, there's different names: a thrift savings plan, a 457 deferred comp plan. They're all basically like a 401k plan. Not going to spend time on pensions because I'm sure most of us here do not have a pension benefit. And they're very structured, rigid plans, so the pension plan is going to vary based on your specific company. I'm going to skip over the pension because this is basically non-existent for today's new workforce. Company match. So employer-sponsored plans like 401ks, even 403bs might offer a match. If you're not participating and you have a match, you're really missing out because if they match, let's say 3%, if you put in 3%, then you're getting 6. You're immediately doubling your money, which is a very good thing to have. So if you have a match, take full advantage of your match. Understand how your match works. It's usually a percentage. IRA accounts, if you don't have an employer-sponsored plan, you can make contributions to an IRA, a traditional or what's called a Roth. One is tax deductible. The traditional IRA is tax deductible. Roth IRA is after tax money that I was talking about earlier, where the contributions grow tax deferred and come out tax free. So again, if you don't have an employer sponsored plan, if you're working for yourself, if you're a contractor, etc., you still have options. You don't have to have a 401k plan. IRA contribution limits are $5,500 per year. That's the most you can put in if you're under 50. So that's basically what you're able to put into one of these accounts. That's the maximum number. You can put any amount up to that. So you're not obligated. If you start an IRA account to put in the maximum, you could put in $100 and that's all you put in. It's completely voluntary. So an IRA is a great way to save for retirement if you don't have an employer-sponsored plan. Vesting is basically This is a vesting schedule that you have on your screen. For those of us that have an employer plan and they match, there might be what's called vesting, which just means um, when does that money become yours? Because it's the employer's money. They can have a vesting schedule as long as 5 years. That's the longest. So if you work at a company 5 years, no matter what their vesting schedule is, you're 100% vested. In this particular example, you can see the vesting is over time. So the column that says, a row that says employee owns, um, that's showing you how much of the employer contribution they're being vested as um, years go by. So in 3 years, they're 50% vested. In year four, they're still 50% vested. And by year five, they're 100% vested. So this can vary by employer. It's usually pretty self-explanatory, but it's important to know it because you may influence your decision sometimes with changing jobs if you know you're about to vest in a lot of employer contributions. Contributions limits for 401ks. I gave you the IRA number. It's actually 5,500. You can do 6,000 if you're over 50. Um, and for 401ks, the limit is $18,000 a year. Is the most anybody can contribute who's under 50. If you're over 50, you can do an extra $6,000, or what's called a catch-up contribution, into a 401k plan. Um, so those are the limits, and again, uh, you can do any amount up to the limit into any of these. Um, Keeping retirement money for retirement. This is important because a lot of times what happens, and this really all ties in together with the first part of our presentation where we talked about building short-term reserves and emergency fund and savings, because if you don't have that and every time you have an emergency, you have to go into your retirement account, then really what's going to happen is your retirement account is not going to grow over time, and you'll find that years and years go by and your retirement account just stays stagnant because you're using it as a short-term savings account. So you want to avoid that, and we all know that there's certain things that happen that are unforeseen. But we've all probably know of people or seen people that are constantly dipping into their retirement account, whether it's a 401k loan or withdrawal, and you just want to try to avoid that as much as possible. And the best way is to build savings and make sure you allocate money in different places so that you're not dipping into your retirement for non-retirement. If you've changed employers and you have a plan there, you can roll that into an IRA account instead of cashing it out. So even one thing to know is if your 401k balance is less than $5,000 and you leave that employer, they have the right to cash you out, which creates a taxable event. They have to give you a certain amount of time. I believe it's 90 days to roll your money over. So they may send you a notice saying, look, if you don't move your balance in 90 days, we're going to cash it out. Just send you a check and it's going to be taxable. You want to make sure you take action and roll it over so that they don't cash you out, because you don't want to get cashed out on that money, especially if you don't need it. Um, Other sources of retirement income, won't spend a lot of time here. I mean, there's other vehicles you can use, and this is giving you some examples. There's different types of annuities that can be used for retirement that have tax benefits. Certain types of life insurance policies can also build cash value, which can be withdrawn for retirement income. So these are other strategies that really would supplement things that we do like a 401k or IRA. So, if you get to a point where you want to put additional monies away beyond what's available in a retirement account, there's other vehicles that can be used to supplement those sources. Um, Boosting retirement income. Again, if there's people that are close to retirement, some of you may have parents that are approaching retirement, and maybe they're hopefully they're doing okay and they've saved enough, but there's other ways that people can, cope with maybe not saving as much. One is working part-time, which actually can be good also for your health. If you're a retiree, working longer, not desirable for a lot of people who want to stop working, and then delaying your Social Security benefit. Um, so that can increase the benefit you get from Social Security. So these are just different things that can be done to boost income. So taking the next steps, right? Have you figured out how much you may need in retirement? What are your goals? Um, you know, what's your saving strategy? Do you have short-term money reserves? Are you saving for retirement? How involved are your children? Again, I think this can be important, those of us that are older, approaching retirement, or actually if there are people listening that their parents are approaching retirement, and you might want to ask your parents, have you done any retirement planning? Spoken to anybody? Do you have a retirement plan? Because uh, if your parents are retiring and they're not going to have enough money in retirement, you might actually have to step in and help them, which can be a burden on children because they're trying to save for themselves, send their kids to school. So these are not easy conversations to have, but it's important to have them amongst families. And that concludes the retirement component of it. At this point, I guess we can open it up for questions. Make sure we left some time for questions.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. If you have a question, go ahead and type it into the chat box so we can see it and Ilyas can address that question. There is his contact information as well if you did want to reach out. But go ahead, we'll leave it open now for a few minutes so you can ask any questions that you may have on any of the topics, retirement or finance or something.
Okay, we have a question from Jessica. Uh, what balance would you recommend between 401k and Roth IRAs? It's a great question. It's $1 million question that's always debated, and there's really no answer to it. And so what I tell people is go with your gut feeling. 401k is pre-tax. Roth IRAs are after-tax dollars. One is going to give you a tax benefit today, which is a 401k, and the Roth is going to give you a tax benefit when you retire. So really, it's about when do you want your tax benefit, now or later? And the right answer to get the right answer to that, you'd have to make assumptions about what is my tax bracket better today or is it going to be better in retirement? And that's a question no one can really answer. So what I tell people is if you feel a certain way about it, like some people say, you know what, I like the idea of having tax-free retirement income. I'm okay with not getting a deduction. I don't need a mathematical formula to prove that to myself. And if that's your point of view, then go all hard on the Roth. If you're kind of torn and you're not sure, then I usually say do a split between those two accounts. So that's really um, my suggestion on 401k versus Roth. Find the combination that works for you, that makes sense, and go with it.
I have a question and I'm gonna say it just because I can. How important would you say that it is to work with a financial planner for these things, and when should you start, especially kind of as you're young and venturing out into the professional world?
I think it's good to start um, as soon as possible working with someone and finding the right person for you. That's going to give you the guidance you need. So I think that beyond a lot of times people get intimidated by talking to a financial planner or professional because they think, I'm going to need all this money to invest or they're going to tell me to do things that I don't want to do. Um, And I think that really it's about finding someone that you're comfortable with that's really going to work towards your goals, right? And not really push anything else onto you. And the reason I think it's important to start early is because, I was talking earlier about habits, right? And forming good habits. And um, a good financial professional can help you form those good habits. It can give you insight. It can give you information. It can also speed up the process of making decisions for you because, we all know we can research stuff on our own on any subject today, but um, someone who's been around, worked with people, knows ins and outs, spends their days, in this field can get to answers very quickly. So I think all around it's good to, start with an advisor right away, um, and just find the right person for you. A lot of times, a good advisor can also just be like a coach, not necessarily tell you new things that you didn't know, but maybe push you a little, nudge you a little bit to actually take action. Because you have a little bit of accountability to that person, right? So that happens a lot of times. We have clients who say like, hey, I really want you to beat me up when I don't, do the things I said I was going to do because, I don't want to fall into procrastination or something like that. So
Okay, yeah,
the
that
best way
is
to find
excellent.
someone is referrals.
Yes. Along those lines too, so I think that sometimes, and just what I've learned recently, is that sometimes people just starting out in the professional world and are kind of hit with these 401k questions, Roth questions, all of that might get misconstrued about working with a financial planner and think, oh, I don't need to do that only because I'm not planning to invest in a certain way or make additional contributions maybe outside of a 401k match plan now. So where does that kind of come in a line for maybe working with someone outside of that, whereas maybe you have a representative that is with your whatever company is doing your retirement through your employer, and you do kind of get matched with people. So how do you understand when something outside of that comes into play?
That's a great question. It probably really depends on what you're getting from maybe the retirement plan representatives, maybe at the place you work. Um, what I found is that that's usually very just focused on the retirement plan and just helping you understand the retirement plan and maybe giving you generic information about retirement. And I think that's a good place to get information on your plan. Like if you have questions about like the funds in your 401k plan or anything like that, they can help you. Um, the, I think when you're at a point where you feel like you need a little bit more personalized advice, maybe personalized attention, maybe, it could be as simple as like, I really just want to figure out how much I should be putting away for retirement. This is when I want to retire. I really want to make sure I'm tracking towards the right goal, or maybe you just want someone to look at your entire situation and just give you suggestions or ideas and of things you may not have thought about, and give you some fresh ideas, and then from there you can decide if those are good things that you agree with or you want to implement those. Maybe not today, maybe tomorrow. So I think it's really about just looking at what your finances are, what your goals are, and then saying, being realistic and honest and saying, hey, maybe I could use some help. Um, and at that point, engaging with hopefully the right person to help you.
Excellent, thank you. Kind of stemming off that too. Sorry, I keep asking questions, but I know people are wondering these things because they tell me. So, what, how closely should you monitor the 401k through an employer? I know just starting out, a lot of times they'll put you into like a certain category, kind of what you talked about before, based on that you should be investing, 10% or 15% towards retirement at a certain age. How closely should you then monitor that and where those investments are going and how they look?
That's a great question. I would say minimally. once a year, you want to take a look and really, you know, examine what you're doing. Um, Maybe twice a year. If you're closer to retirement, if you're like 50 plus or in your 60s, then you probably want to at least quarterly look at, what's going on in your 401k plan. And that might sound, you know, very different from what a lot of people see, where people are like checking their account every day. And the reason I say that is retirement is a long-term investment. And the only way you're going to succeed at retirement is to find investments that get you good long-term returns. And in order to get that, you're going to have to accept market volatility, and you're going to have to accept market cycles. So, let's say you're 30 years old, you have 30 years pretty much until you even start to really glance in the retirement direction. And 30 years is a long time. So whatever happens in the market like tomorrow is not as impactful to you. And you shouldn't be making changes based upon it. So most people should come up with a retirement portfolio that they're comfortable with for the long term. And when you do that, you need to stick with that. So um, that's really why I say once a year, maybe twice a year, because a lot of times what happens is we're looking at things all the time. We're getting fed so much information today from so many different places that we're more than likely to make like an emotional knee jerk reaction, right? Like a great example was Brexit that happened, a couple of months ago. Um, and that shocked everybody. It wasn't expected that, the vote was going to turn out that way, um, where they voted to, basically withdraw from the European Union. So the market tanked, and the global stock markets tanked. And, some people were panicking and whatnot. And I'm bringing this up because I have a client who, after it happened, and we had just talked about his portfolio, and he said, "This is what I'm comfortable with. I want to stay with." He's a moderate investor. He's older, a little older, and he was very adamant of like, and I was trying to tell him he should be a little more conservative, maybe, and he said, "No, I want to stay with moderate. I want to stay with moderate." And um, the market tanked, and he panicked, and we were talking about maybe making some changes to his portfolio. And I was telling him, look, if you're not comfortable, we should make some changes. But this is what you said like 2 days ago. This is what you said you were comfortable with. And while we were having this dialogue, the market recovered completely over the next couple of days. And what was interesting is he completely changed his perspective because the market came back. And I say all this to say that he was watching everything he could see and looking at everything, and it was causing him to panic. And the reality is it was a short-term market effect at the moment, and he almost made a very bad decision based on that. So that's why I say I think once a year, twice a year, if you're a younger person just saving, that's sufficient. Once you spend some initial time determining how to invest in your plan, and you're comfortable with what you did, and you did some homework or you got some advice, whatever it was, and you decided this is the way I'm going to invest, once you've done that, I think once to twice a year is sufficient.
Perfect. Thank you so much. There is one more question in there from Stephanie about retirement, if you wanted to address that.
Right. Okay, so the question is today's environment. People are not generally staying at companies for 10 to 20 years. And whenever you move, what can you do to make sure you don't lose your retirement funds? I believe that's what I see as understanding this question. So one key thing is if you're contributing into an employer plan, um, that's your money. If you leave that employer, you take that money with you. That's from day one in a 401k plan. So If you made one contribution and then you left your job, you can roll out that one contribution you made um, into an IRA or into your new employer plan. It's your money. You can take it with you without triggering taxes and penalties. The only thing you may not be able to take is the match that the employer provided, and um, that can be up to a 5-year vesting. So if you just have to look at your vesting for your employer to see what their vesting program is. But that's only for their money that they match to you. So your money is always yours. And you can easily roll that money out into an IRA, an individual retirement account, which is under your control, not tied to an employer, or you can move it into a new employer plan. Um, so it's a very good question because no one obviously stays with jobs anymore 10, 20 years. So a lot of our clients are always every 3 to 5 years changing jobs. And what they'll do is they'll just roll that money into an IRA account. And what's happening over time is their IRA is actually the biggest part of their retirement, and that's where we help them manage that. So and their 401k just becomes a conduit to save while they're working and get tax deductions, get an employer match, um, and then they leave and they roll it out. So hopefully that answers your question.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Thank you, Ilyas, for taking the time to go through all of this with us. I know that definitely sparks some questions and some to-dos for hopefully everyone that was listening. So I appreciate your time. For everyone that participated, thank you so much. I will send a follow-up email as well with a link to the recording and like I mentioned earlier, the survey. So I appreciate you participating. We hope to see you next month for a stress management webinar. And thanks again to Ilyas.
Thank you. My pleasure. Take care,
Thanks.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.